Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader, and it's just me this week. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. This week, the game we're talking about is 1989 and 2021's Famicom Detective Club Part II, The Girl Who Stands Behind, the mystery of a murdered high school girl and the possible connection to a rumored ghostly entity that appears at night. That's right, we're coming at you with another solo episode this week. Peter had a bit of an emergency today, so he was not able to get his research done in time, and he also probably was not going to have time to record, so it's up to me, and that's okay, because the game we're talking about today is a lot of fun, and I'm very excited to talk about it. I'm a little bummed, because I was looking forward to, like, some of Peter's reactions to some of the information I found, but I'll still get that, you just won't. And you can be jealous if you want, but that's the special privilege that comes with being me. But before that, we have one piece of composer follow-up news that I figure should be mentioned. There's a Mana series anime coming out, I guess. It is called Legend of Mana. I don't know if it's an adaptation of one of the games or something. I'm not sure. It's Legend of Mana: The Teardrop Crystal is the full title. And apparently the opening was written by Kevin Pankin, and the main score was written by Yoko Shimomura, two people that we are big fans of here on this show. So that's pretty cool. If you're interested in a Legend of Mana anime, there you go. The heavens answered your prayers and Yoko Shimomura wrote the music. That's pretty cool. But that's really all we got, and I guess I did this out of order on accident. But how am I doing? What am I playing? Nothing. I actually legitimately have not played a single video game in a week. I played like a couple of demos. There was a Steam Next Fest, and as usual, I downloaded like 26 demos to try, and I played like 10 of them, and about 7 of those sucked. And so, honestly, after getting so many duds in a row, and just my general inability to start games right now, I guess, I just kind of gave up and uninstalled all the demos. I didn't end up playing anymore. Whatever, it happens. The ones that I think stood out when I actually played them and enjoyed them, this game called Potionomics. It comes out in a couple weeks. Had a pretty interesting soundtrack. The animation style weirds me out though, mainly because it looks like those mobile game ads where the ad is a complete lie as to what the game actually is. You know the ones. I played one called Decarnation, which was a horror game, a 2D horror game, and I couldn't figure out why the art style looked so familiar, and it's because it's Habbo Hotel, and I don't know what to do with that information. But it was pretty interesting, about a woman who's having to deal with the effects of getting older and how society is kind of not nice to women as they get older in general, and that kind of thing, especially when they're in the entertainment industry. And then one called Night Loops, which I described as Yume Nikki and Majora's Mask had a makeout session, and this is the game that came out of it, because that's what it is. It's weird, all the way down to masks that give you specific abilities. But yeah, other than that, I haven't played any games. I bought a certain game that came out on Switch, and it's sitting in my Switch right now, and I haven't started it yet, and maybe one day I will. Maybe one day. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Famicom Detective Club II, The Girl Who Stands Behind. I guess Part 2 is the actual title, but it's mostly referred to as just 2. This game was originally released for the Famicom Disk System in 2 volumes. Volume 1 released on May 23rd, 1989, and Volume 2 released on June 30th, 1989. The Famicom Disk System was pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It was a peripheral and add-on for the Famicom that let it play games from discs. instead of just cartridges. A Super Famicom remake was released on April 1st, 1998. This was generally considered the version you should play until recently. There was a GBA release on August 10th, 2004, and I guess those were considered alright, but they were the Famicom version and not the Super Famicom version. None of these releases ever left Japan. Famicom Detective Club was a Japanese exclusive pair of games for decades. But just last year, it got remade again, and they announced it on a Japanese Nintendo Direct, and everybody was like, but are we gonna get that over here? Like, is that gonna leave Japan? And then somehow, shockingly, it did. Both of them being The Missing Heir and The Girl Who Stands Behind. It was remade for the Nintendo Switch, released worldwide for the first time on May 14th, 2021. And that's pretty much where you should go play it nowadays if you're at all interested in these games. The original game was developed by Nintendo R&D 1 and published by Nintendo, but the 2021 remakes were developed by Mages. So what is Famicom Detective Club II? Well, as you might guess from the title, it's the second game in the Famicom Detective Club series, which is a series of point-and-click mystery adventures. Basically, the investigation section of an Ace Attorney game, but it's now the entire game. It's that. That's basically what it is. Though, in a lot of ways, kind of more convoluted in certain parts. This game, even the remakes, kind of show their age, not in like a super frustrating manner, luckily, but in a boy howdy, you can still tell that this was a Famicom game. It just in the way that it's like structured. And while it is the second game in the series, it is actually a prequel that takes place before the first entry, which again is called The Missing Heir. The plot of The Girl Who Stands Behind, and you'll have to forgive me if I leave out any details, because the plot summaries on the internet of this game are absolute garbage. Oh my god, there's some of the worst plot summaries. The one on Wikipedia has a point where it mentions somebody by name as if they have said that name before in the description. Doesn't explain who they are. And that happens multiple times. So, yeah, bear with me on this one. When a high school girl by the name of Yoko Kojima is found dead on the side of a river, the police acquire the assistance of the Utsugi Detective Agency, run by a man named Shunsuke Utsugi. The player takes control of Utsugi's assistant, a teenager that is named by the player. Utsugi puts his assistant in charge of solving the murder case, and so the protagonist begins collecting information at the victim's school, Ushimitsu High School. During the investigation, he gains the assistance of two of Yoko's friends, a rough-and-tumble delinquent boy named Hitomi Kawai, and more importantly, a determined girl by the name of Ayumi Tachibana. As the investigation progresses, a possible connection appears between Yoko's murder and the disappearance of another girl, Shinobu Asakawa, roughly 15 years earlier. Not only that, they begin to find themselves enveloped by the rumor of the Girl Who Stands Behind, or the Girl in the Back, a ghostly, blood-soaked girl who supposedly appears behind you when you're in the school at night. A rumor that Yoko appeared to have been thoroughly investigating before her death. So who killed Yoko Kojima? Is there any truth to the rumor of the Girl in the Back? And how is this case connected to the disappearance of Shinobu Asakawa? So what are my experiences with Famicom Detective Club? Well, I've played the remake. I actually did the Missing Heir review for NWR, and then I played The Girl Who Stands Behind after that. The Girl Who Stands Behind is the better game, like, by far. Oh my god, it's so much better. The plot's better, the mystery's better, everything is better. It's all better. Because The Missing Heir, I genuinely could not tell you any of the plot if you asked me. Like, it's fine. It's a fine mystery game, I guess. I don't know, it's a lot shorter than The Girl Who Stands Behind, but, like, adding the ghost rumor stuff really, really brings a lot. And also the fact that Ayumi is a bigger part of the plot in this one, where she's kind of just a side character you talk to every, 20, 30 minutes in The Missing Heir, which sucks because she is my wife. I think the main takeaway that I have about these games is that they're really interesting novelties. Even the remakes, again, pretty much I don't have confirmation of this, because one of these days I am going to play the Super Famicom version just to see how different it is. Because that's the one that got a fan translation, and that's the one you could have played before this. Because I want to see how much it was actually changed in the remake. Because genuinely, if I had to take a guess, all they changed was the art. And nothing else. Because it has none of the quality of life features you would expect from a game like this. And in a post-Ace Attorney world, that's kind of a problem. But at the same time, I don't think it's that bad. And I do also think that, again, as a novelty, these games came out 3 decades ago and is finally coming out in America, for the first time, this relic of the past. It's just interesting, I think. I was very excited to play these remakes, and I had a good time with them last year, I think. So if you like mystery games, it's worth a shot, but I wouldn't sprint to your nearest eShop to buy it. So, for information on the development of this game, oh man, I found some really fun stuff. I really, really dig some of the information I found. So these games were actually the very first writing project for Yoshio Sakamoto, who would later go on to helm and write the Metroid franchise. He is still the man in charge of that franchise to this day. Cited inspirations for the game include the filmography of Dario Argento, which is the second game we've talked about, at least, with that same inspiration, the other one being Clock Tower. Various detective novels by the Japanese writer Seishi Yokomizo, and the 1983 Enix game The Portopia Serial Murder Case, which I am not familiar with, but should probably look into. Maybe not to play, but to look at. The Girl Who Stands Behind specifically, though, its tone was inspired by shoujo manga, which for anybody that does not know, shoujo manga is typically manga that stars or is aimed at younger women, essentially. It's the same as shonen, which is, aimed at younger men. Granted, you don't need to be that demographic to watch them. I watch plenty of shoujo crap. Apparently, both games, though, they came into being, and I can't believe this is... I checked the source on Wikipedia to make sure this was real, and it was in Iwata Asks. It doesn't get much more real than that. Gunpei Yokoi apparently walked up to the team one day and just said, "We need to make a game called Famicom Shonen Tanteidan," which translates to Famicom Youth Detective Club. And that was the whole pitch. He gave them a title and then said, make a game out of this title. But Sakamoto, coincidentally, had been itching to write a text-based adventure at this point, and so he asked the higher-ups to put him on this project as the scenario writer. It reviewed generally favorably at the time, somewhere among, 30 to 28 for Famitsu, essentially. The remakes kinda didn't do as well. They're hovering in the low to mid 70s on Metacritic, both of them. Part 2 currently sits at 74. The Super Famicom version is often cited as one of the most visually impressive games on the system, which honestly, if you go look at it, it kinda is. I'm not gonna lie. For a Super Famicom game, it looks really, really good. Now, of the two games, The Girl Who Stands Behind is generally considered to be the better entry due to its spookier atmosphere and more complex mystery. Like I said, it was remade for the Super Famicom, and it was actually released through a flash cartridge service in 1998. This is the version that has the fan translation, as I mentioned. It was apparently the 7th most popular game released on this service that was run by Nintendo Power in Japan. A GBA release happened of both games in 2004, and this was the first time that the games had been re-released since the founding of SARO, which is Japan's equivalent to the ESRB, their games rating board. And The Girl Who Stands Behind specifically was given a C rating, meaning it was marked only suitable for children 15 and up. And that gave it the honor of being the first Nintendo game to ever get that rating in the 2 years since SARO had been a thing at that point. Because, I mean, it has murder and ghosts and all that, so, you know, it ended up... I can't blame them for rating it that way, I guess. Both games re-released on the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS eShops, though it should be noted that the version released on the Wii and 3DS is the original Famicom version, but the Wii U got the Super Famicom version, and I don't know why that would be, but hey, sure. Obviously, like I mentioned, the Switch remakes of both games came out in 2021, which is the way to play them today. They're fully voice acted, they have updated art and rearranged music. In fact, there is actually a third Famicom Detective Club game. It is called BS Tante Club Yuki ni Kieta Kako, and it released over the Satellaview, which was a Nintendo peripheral that allowed players to download games from a satellite broadcast. There was also famously, I believe, a Fire Emblem game released over this. I don't actually know if that game, like, quote-unquote, came out. Instead of the male protagonist of the first two entries, though, this story stars Ayumi Tachibana and featured voice acting for her. So when these games were remade for Switch, and they did voice acting for the entire game, they brought back the original voice actress from this Satellaview game to voice Ayumi Tachibana once more for the first time since 1997. And that's a very Japanese thing to do. The industry takes, like, voice actors and keeping them consistent very seriously over there, from what I can tell. And I just find that really neat, though. I think that's cool. According to Masahiro Sakurai, Ayumi was actually in consideration for the roster of Super Smash Bros. Melee, but she didn't really make it past the in consideration phase of the process. Basically, from what I could tell, it was essentially she was in the phase where her name was written on a piece of paper and she didn't go any further than that. I believe Sakurai said something about, like, I didn't think that she'd have enough recognition overseas, which, alright, Martha and Roy are in that game, but sure. She does, however, appear as a trophy in Melee, so there's that. There's also apparently a Famicom Detective Club micro game in WarioWare Touched. I never saw that one when I played Touched, but that's neat. I wonder if they took it out of the Western version. They might have, I don't know. And in terms of the future of the franchise, first of all, I would love a remake of that Satellaview game. I think that would be really cool. After the release of the remakes of the original two games, the studio director at Mages actually voiced interest in developing a new entry in the series. I would take that. I want more Ayumi. I really, really like Ayumi Tachibana. I think she's very fun. She's barely in The Missing Heir, but, like, The Girl Who Stands Behind is where you can definitely see her shine a bit more, and I love her. I don't know how realistic that hope is, because I couldn't find, like, sales numbers, but I don't think these games sold very well, here or in Japan, which is unfortunate. Luckily, I feel like they were probably pretty cheap to make, because, like, they're visual novels. It's not like those are going to be super expensive, but who knows? I kind of hope that the series continues. I hope they make a new entry and they make it feel modern. That would be neat. I would buy that. So for the composer we're going to focus on for this is actually the person who arranged the soundtrack for the 2021 remakes. a man by the name of Takeshi Abo. Not a lot of information about him. He was born January 17th, 1973 in Ichinoseki, Iwate, Japan. He joined the industry in the early 1990s, working for a company called StarCraft Inc. Not the game, a company apparently. And during this time, he particularly specialized in conversions of Western games for Japanese systems. And it's really weird to research him for the Famicom Detective Club games in particular, because none of the websites I can find credit him at all. Moby Games, VGMDB, nothing. None of them credit him with doing the arrangements. So how do I know he did the arrangements? Because his name is in the credits. I specifically paid attention when I played and wrote down his name because I wanted to cover these games. And he's there, I swear. And I know it's the same Takeshi Abo. I'm not crazy. The Moby Games page says that he works at or with mages. Surely there aren't two Takeshi Abos who happen to compose video game music and also work with mages. That's ridiculous. Anyways, in terms of his discography, he did a lot of stuff. And I'm only going to mention some of the stuff that I recognize. Notably, he did a lot of visual novels. Like a lot of visual novels. The things that stood out on the list that Moby Games showed me were Might and Magic, Clouds of Zine, King's Bounty. He did the sound effects on Pepsi Man. I wish he did the music on Pepsi Man. That would have been great. Man, we can't cover that game on this show because it has like 2 songs. I want to talk about Pepsi Man. He seems to be the main composer for pretty much every Steins Gate game, including the original, Variant Space Octet, My Darling's Embrace, Linear Bounded, Phenagram, Zero, and Elite. I don't know if that's all of them, but I'm going to assume it is. He did the music for Phantom Breaker Battlegrounds and Omnia, Corpse Party Blood Drive, Psycho Pass Mandatory Happiness, and Mega Dimension Neptunia 7. So, dude really likes to score visual novels a lot. So that's interesting. And Pepsi Man. He worked on Pepsi Man. We get to bring Pepsi Man up on this show. Man, dreams really do come true. In terms of this historical development research for the actual soundtrack of this game, the original soundtrack was actually written by Kenji Yamamoto, whom we've already talked about. We talked about him in episode 57 for his work on Super Metroid. Takeshi Abo, as I said, rearranged the soundtrack for the remakes. Yamamoto actually went into this project with the intention of pushing the Famicom's sound capabilities to their fullest extent. He wanted to make sure, this was the end of the Famicom's life. I'm pretty sure the Super Famicom had been out for a while by the time this game came out. So, he really just wanted to squeeze all the juices he could get out of that sound chip. Now, one of my favorite things that I found about this game. So while working on the music, Sakamoto apparently went to Kenji Yamamoto, and he said, "Hey, I want the final scene to scare the absolute crap out of players. I need your help to do that." So how did Kenji Yamamoto achieve this in a world where the Super Famicom had very little resources to work with in order to make you scared? Well, apparently, all of the music for the entire game is set to roughly half the volume that you'd usually hear in a game on the Famicom. And then the final scene's music plays at full volume. So I guess that's one way to do it. I don't think that was kept intact in the remake. I feel like I would have noticed, but maybe I just gotta play it again to find out. I mean, it's not long. Could probably play it again at some point. Speaking of the remakes, though, one of the best features of the remake is the ability to switch between the original Famicom soundtrack, the Super Famicom soundtrack, and the newly arranged soundtrack at any time. It's super cool. I found myself switching back and forth between all three constantly just to hear the differences. It's really neat, and I wish more remakes of older games would do that, you know? Alright, let's get into the critical 5 for The Girl Who Stands Behind. And honestly, we kind of got to start with probably my second favorite song on the soundtrack. This is critical track number 1, Title Screen. Now come on, that's a catchy song. The song is super catchy. It's one of the first songs I ever heard even before I played the remake. And I wish more people were covering songs from this game, specifically this one. I think this is really well made for a cover of some sort. And in general, I think this game's just got some good material to work with. But I think this is one of my favorite tunes in the game. It's definitely the one that I can pull off the top of my head really easily. And the one I remember the most. It's a really, really neat song. I think it's got a good groove to it, and I think it would be fun to watch, like, an orchestra play it, maybe. I don't know. It's neat. I just like it. It's super catchy. But speaking of catchy and grooving, I didn't talk about grooving, but we're going to talk about grooving now. Critical track number 2 is Downtown. That's right. I really, really dig this song's groove. I want you to look me in the eye when you're listening to this song and tell me that this game did not 100% have influence on the soundtrack of Ace Attorney. Because I could hear this being in an Ace Attorney game. But more than anything, it also kind of reminds me of something I would have heard in, like, Trauma Team? I don't know why Trauma Team's what comes to mind, but that's basically what I get. It really, really has that feel of hitting the streets, getting that information, finding what you need to solve the case. That fantastic bass part is a lot of fun, and then when everything drops out except for the sort of beeping synth, I really, really dig that as well. It's just a fun song. It feels good to listen to, and it's a good time in general. And again, feels like Ace Attorney music, so I would bet you money that this soundtrack had influence on those. Critical track number 3, let's jump into some of the creepier music. Specifically, let's talk about critical track number 3, Girl Standing in the Back. Now this one reminds me of Clock Tower more than anything, which I saw a couple people point out in the comments of some of these videos. I wanted to get the more supernatural side in there. You've got that MIDI choir, which you'll hear in a couple other places on the soundtrack, but for the most part I think it's used really well here. It's got this very tense feeling to it. Of course, it should. It's the theme of a ghost, or at least the rumor of a ghost, the tale of this spirit that appears behind you at school at night. And it's just really neat. I think it really brings across this creepy atmosphere that really, really gives this game an edge over the Missing Heir, because it has personality to it, and I really, really, really dig it. And more than anything, I think it just, like, It gives some personality to the girl standing in the back in particular, but more than that, it also just sounds like early 90s ghost stuff. Not that I don't think it's like easy to take seriously, but it does have sort of it's a song of its time. Critical track number 4 is actually my favorite song in the game. This is Revealed. Like I said, this is my favorite song on the soundtrack. It's got that real fast-paced, tense feeling to it. Usually when you hear this song, you've just learned something that is possibly problematic. You've had a breakthrough that it could lead to some bad places, and you've really got to start acting now. Weirdly enough, I think the SNES version of this song is possibly better than the updated version, if I'm being honest. It's one of the only ones where I could say that for certain. They all have their own strengths, all 3 versions of the soundtrack, but I think in this particular track's case, the SNES version is better. I think it fits the MIDI a lot more. But even in general, like, I think this is just a really, really good, tense crisis theme, sort of. I dig it a lot. And finally, critical track number 5. I mean, this is basically her game. We need to talk about her theme. This is Sunset, Ayumi Tachibana. Again, this is her game, more than it is the protagonist's game. This is the origin story of Ayumi Tachibana. And it's only natural we talk about her theme. I don't know what it is about this song, but it feels very of its era. It feels very early 90s, but at the same time, this is not the kind of theme I would expect a female character from that era to have. It's got this really good determined tone to it, which kind of really matches Ayumi because she spends the entire game being told, you need to not be involved in this investigation because it's super dangerous, and saying, yeah, but I will though, and you won't stop me. To the point where at one point, she does something very drastic, which is fun. A lot of fun. She's great. I love Ayumi. It's a good song, and I think it fits her personality extremely well. Especially as somebody who lets this one case and this one experience sort of drive the rest of her life from there, brings her into the detective industry, has her hired as another assistant at the Utsuki Detective Agency. It's good. I like this a lot. It's fun. For our tracks of the cutting room floor, I got 2. So let's talk about them. The first, man, you know I always gotta include a piano piece if I can find one. This is Lyricism Investigation. I think this is another one of my favorites, honestly. It's a good, somber piano piece. If I had to guess, this is probably talked about when, like, Ayumi is talking about Yoko, or somebody's talking about Shinobu who knew her. Like, sad story time, essentially. 'Cause remember, like, they're seniors, but they're high schoolers. And one of their friends is dead, probably murdered. And that's not an easy thing to deal with, I would assume. I don't actually have experience with that, but I'm gonna assume it's hard. And this song, I think, really matches that feeling. And again, piano music. I absolutely adore piano music. It's fantastic. This is another song I think really feels like Ace Attorney, though. I think it's great. And the other track on the cutting room floor, this is Reasoning 2. This is, of course, another investigation tune. This one has that creepy air to it, which means it's probably related either to finding the murderer or the ghost, the girl in the back. I assume the girl in the back is probably involved in stuff with this. There's more of those choir midis in the background that give it this really unique feel. And just, man, it feels really neat to listen to this music. This game has surprisingly good music. And I really dig it, and I think this is, again, one of the better examples. I think it's a really fun song, and I don't know, it feels right for the genre and the story. So what will I never forget about Famicom Detective Club Part 2, The Girl Who Stands Behind? Well, its name is the longest name on the face of the planet, and I talked about a game called A Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk. But hey, it's neat. I think that's how I would put it. It is neat. It is an interesting novelty and a neat piece of gaming history that you can play yourself. You don't need to. I wouldn't say it's a must play before you die, but you can. And they're relatively short anyways. So like if you want to try like a mystery game, I do genuinely think that while it is quite cliched, especially for the time, and has like a checklist of tropes, I do think the story in The Girl Who Stands Behind is pretty alright. I think the characters are fun and well written, and I really do hope that they get to make a new one at some point. Again, I'm not going to hold my breath. I don't think these games sold very well here or in Japan. I don't know. I hope against hope that it's able to happen, but it's kind of up in the air, I guess. I also kind of wish that Ayumi did make it into Melee, because I want to know what that would have looked like. I just want to know what her moveset would have been. Like, what would she have done? Can you imagine if she was in Ultimate and they, like, put in the mystery solving aspect into the character? Like, man, in some alternate universe that happened. Some alternate universe way, way, way far away, because it was never going to happen in this one. And that's pretty much where we're going to leave it this week. Again, I hope you enjoyed the solo episode. Hopefully next week we will be back with both of us continuing the season of spooks. I'm glad I got to talk about a mystery game about a ghost this week. And next week, we're actually going to talk about a game that's not kind of horror. We're going to talk about a game that is horror, straight up. So don't you worry. The kid gloves are coming off next week. In the meantime, you can find both of us on Twitter. Me at StringPixel, and you can find Peter at PeteSpeakEasy. You can find the video version of this podcast over on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel. But if you're looking for the audio feed, the audio versions that you're wanting to put on your phone and take with you, well, you can find those at anondino.squarespace.com. You can also find it on pretty much every podcatcher that you can think of, including Spotify. And not only do we have a feed on Spotify where you can listen to the episodes, we also have a playlist that I usually keep updated, where if we have any music that we talk about on this show and it's on Spotify, well, it gets added to that playlist, that monster playlist. Is Famicom Detective Club on Spotify? No, it's a first-party Nintendo title. Those might as well not exist when it comes to music streaming. What are you, nuts? Anyways, you can find our social media for the show at Soundchat OST, where you can give us feedback, tell us how we're doing, and you can also give us suggestions for games that we should cover in the future. I really like seeing some of the suggestions people come up with. I think a couple of the suggestions we've had in the past have been some of our best episodes. I think they're a lot of fun. Speaking of suggestions, I guess this would be less suggestions and more like help. We're coming up on our 200th episode, and of course for that episode we are planning to do the best of the 2010s. We're gonna figure out the top 10 soundtracks of the last decade, which is a lot of games. It turns out 10 years is a lot of time for video games to release. So what we need you to do is if you go to our Twitter, you'll find the pinned thread, and you'll find a bunch of links to a bunch of surveys. Now, the 2010 through 2014 surveys are already closed. Those aren't accepting responses anymore. But at time of release, we have released the 2015 and 2016 and 2017 surveys. So you can go take those. And by the end of this week, we will have 2018 and 2019 out as well. All of those will close at midnight Eastern Standard Time on October 16th. So make sure you get those in. All you got to do is go in, look at the list of games, pick your 5 favorite game soundtracks on that list, and we'll take care of the rest. From here, once the last of the surveys close for the next 5 years, there will be a tiebreaker survey in case we need it, which we might for 2017 in particular. But also, after that, we will take the 25 from the first half of the decade and the 25 from the second half of the decade. They will go on their own surveys, and we'll take the top 10 from each of those. And that will be the pool that Peter and I will pull from to figure out the top 10 soundtracks to talk about for this episode. We are very nearly there, very nearly done with the prep stage. So if you could help us out, that would be super helpful. And thank you in advance, I guess. Next week, I'll be talking about Seiko Kobuchi, and Peter will be talking about Ryota Kozuka. I think that'll be fun. To play us out, I mean, I might as well do the staff roll, right? Like the credits music? That seems to fit. Like I said, there's no covers of this soundtrack, which is a shame because I think this soundtrack has a lot of good material to work with. And hey, video game music people, get on it. You know you want to. That being said, the intro of the staff roll is one of the most 90s things I've ever heard in my entire life. And the entire song in general just feels 90s. And I know what you're saying. 89 is the 90s. Just deal with it. 89 is the 90s. Anyways, hope you enjoy that. We will see you next week. Thank you for listening to Original Sound Chat. Take care.